I'll turn now to introduce the Empty Chair Award. The Empty Chair Award was established in 2016, and it's an award that's presented to a person who is worthy to receive the Voltaire or the Young Voltaire Human Rights Award, but they cannot be present to receive the award in person due to the consequences of their exercise of advocacy for human rights, free speech or civil liberties. This year, Liberty Victoria is awarding the 2021 Liberty Victoria Empty Chair Award to all refugees and asylum seekers in on and offshore detention. There are a number of individual refugees and asylum seekers in detention who were nominated for the 2021 Empty Chair Award. And in recognition of the human rights work that a number of people in detention have been doing over the years, Liberty Victoria decided to award the Empty Chair Award to all refugees and asylum seekers in detention. The group and individuals who are in that circumstance have fought to defend freedom and to articulate their experiences and the injustices that they have suffered in detention and in the system that Australia has really put in place for refugees and asylum seekers. They've shown moral leadership, political resistance, and they've worked together in protests from remote islands, hotel prisons, immigration detention facilities, and more recently for those who've been released by taking the extraordinarily brave step of speaking out in front of the buildings where they were previously detained. Australian immigration detention policies and practices have meant that refugees and asylum seekers who fled persecution and torture in their own countries continue to be dehumanised and detained, having to wait years for their claims to be determined. The ongoing and indefinite detention of asylum seekers and refugees is a fundamental breach of refugee and asylum seekers' human rights and not in accordance with Australia's international obligations. I'd like to acknowledge today that I understand from Papua New Guinea we have Halal Uden, who's also known as Spicy, tuning in. He is also a person who has sought asylum from Australia in 2013, and he was in prison in the Manus Island Detention Centre. He's currently in the Bomana prison in PNG, even though a court actually granted him residency in PNG. When the PNG government decided to appeal that decision, he was imprisoned again, and he's now awaiting the outcome of that decision. Grace, who is present, she's going to share a couple of links for Spicy's story, and I encourage you all to read that as well. And thank you, Spicy, for tuning in today from where you are. On behalf of refugees and asylum seekers in on and offshore detention, the award tonight will be accepted by Mustafa Azimitabar and Craig Foster, both of whom we'll hear from tonight. I'll just give a brief introduction and then I'll hand over to Moz and Craig. So Mustafa Azimitabar, who's also known as Moz, was incarcerated by the Australian government on Manus Island and more recently in the Mandurah Hotel and Park Hotel in Melbourne, despite being a recognised refugee. During this time, he exhibited an outstanding commitment to raising his voice for human rights and advocating for other refugees publicly and visibly at a great risk to himself. He's played a significant role in raising the profile of refugee rights in Australia, empowered other refugees to tell their stories, and contributed to change the public narrative, as well as the eventual release of hundreds of medevac refugees in Australia. We also have Craig Foster, who's present tonight. Craig is a former Socceroo and a former SBS presenter who's currently the Adjunct Professor of Sport and Social Responsibility at Torrens University. Craig Foster came to prominence in the human rights arena for his leadership in relation to Hakeem Al-Arabi, who was a Bahraini footballer that had been granted refugee status by Australia in 2017. Hakeem was detained in a Thai prison when he travelled to Thailand for his honeymoon, and he faced possible extradition to Bahrain, where he likely would have faced torture and possibly death. Craig was part of the advocacy campaign, a successful advocacy campaign to obtain the release of Hakeem from a Thai prison, which enabled him to return to Australia. In 2019, Craig travelled to Port Moresby to meet with refugees and asylum seekers still detained in Papua New Guinea and Nauru to bring attention to their flight. Craig has continued to be a strong advocate of refugees and asylum seekers and has continued to campaign strongly on their behalf, highlighting the cruel government policies and laws that affect asylum seekers and refugees. Please join me in welcoming both Moz and Craig this evening. I'll hand over to Moz first.
Thanks, Julia. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we stand today. I would like to pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, elders past, present, and emerging. Also, I would like to thank Auntie Georgina for welcoming me and other refugees to your beautiful land. Everyone in Australia must respect to all Aboriginal people, and I believe that everything that people have achieved in their life is because the kindness of Aboriginal people. Thank you very much for gave me this opportunity to speak now. My name is Mustafa Azimi Tabar. I am a refugee who was locked up in detention for 2,737 days by the Australian government for no crime. Unfortunately, part of the refugees who were with me are still in detention in offshore and onshore. They are still suffering behind the tinted glass and fences. They don't have hope. They do hunger strike because they want to see people that pay attention to them. No one can hear them. They are very hopeless these days. After nearly 3,000 days, the Australian government don't want to stop torturing these innocent human beings. I got my freedom on 21st of January 2021 with the help of many wonderful people in Australia. But still, these refugees are locked up. And the silence of the opposition party, that is Labour Party, is a green light to the Australian government. Sadly, torturing innocent people, torturing minorities, torturing vulnerable people is going to be like a legislation in Australia. And the Labour Party is stamping this legislation with their silence. I want to say that how long these innocent people should be locked up in jail. In the other way, many people in the sector of advocacy, are giving false information to the society, and some of them don't do it deliberately. For example, when we call these places like hotel, we give hope to the government, because this place was a hotel. This place, like the park and the Mantra prisons, were hotel before, when we were locked up. And the Australian government are controlling all the narratives, and they are playing game with innocent refugees. And the truth is that refugees are human beings. They have hope, they have dreams, fears, like you people outside the prisons. And I really want to thank you amazing people who are always thinking of these innocent people. And also want to tell something that if we see that these governments are torturing me and other refugees for more than 8 years, is because they have a cruel system and they are protecting each other. But who do we have? You know, we need to create a system for our advocacy. Unfortunately, the opposition party is ignoring us, is ignoring our advocacy, because they are a part of, they started this game and they don't want to be involved. Sometimes they say some words, and most of the time they are blind and dumb. I hope this meeting put pressure on all of the politicians who are silent against this cruelty, and I believe that they enable crime against humanity with their silence. Human rights should be beyond the politics. Unfortunately, these human beings behind the tinted glass are dying because of politics of these politicians, because they want to achieve votes, and they do whatever they can to achieve votes. And the Australian government also have spent more than $12 billion with your taxes. People in Australia are paying tax, and the Australian government are using the taxes for torturing these innocent human beings. For like 20 years, refugees are being accused of throwing their children in the ocean. They call refugees bad people, terrorists, illiterate. Before, they targeted different parts of the society, like Vietnamese and Lebanese. Each time they target a part of the society. And I believe that as long as we are not together, we cannot defeat this government. When we get together, I believe we can destroy this government. If we want to, and we need to crumble down this tinted glass with our unity. If we see that these buildings are used as prisons and also fences, detention centers, it's because they are using the taxes of people for torturing a part of the society. And I want all of you people get together and put the organizations, all the organizations should be get together, and we need to make a system for our advocacy. Otherwise, these the Australian government continue their torture against this innocent, for these innocent people. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope this award to these innocent refugees can make a noise, and hopefully we see all of them get their freedom, because they are here for medical treatment and they haven't received any proper treatment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moz. What you said is completely correct. The way that we are treating refugees and asylum seekers is shameful. and the way that you've been treated is shameful. What you said was human rights should be beyond politics, and that's exactly right, that this is about people's lives, and we do have to band together to help people who are in awful circumstances like the one that you were in. So thank you very much, Moz, for sharing your story and for being
Thank
here
you, Julia.
tonight.
Just one thing. When I received my visa, the time when I got my freedom, I was so happy. And when I went to my friend's house, they didn't give me any accommodation or any financial support. They said, just go and find somewhere. This is what the Australian government told me. And when I got home and I read the paper, it is mentioned that the holder of this visa is not entitled to study and get a qualification. And this is how they are discriminating refugees with other parts of the society. If I am not allowed to study, then I have to just be like second or third class citizens. But I like to study, I like to help people, and I want to be a part of this society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moz. I'll hand over briefly to Craig Foster now.
Yes, thank you, Julia, and Moz, for those very accurate, very honest, and very stirring words. As always, my good friend. Thank you, Julia, for and to Liberty Victoria for what you've done this evening, giving a presentation of this Empty Chair Award to all those refugees, both offshore in Nauru, over 100 still stranded in PNG, and of course around 140 or so Medivac refugees still locked up 24 hours a day here in Australia. So important to acknowledge the bravery that they've all shown, and I was speaking to Moz this afternoon about courage and bravery and saying, what is it? How do we characterize it? How do we define real courage? Well, it takes firstly incredible courage to flee one's land, to strike out with no certainty whatsoever as to how you or your family is going to be able to create a new life or even survive. It takes, I can't even begin to imagine the level of incredibly strong human spirit to survive, to be still there after 8 years locked up in so many of these institutions under Australia's very cruel policy. I want to acknowledge Auntie Georgina as well, and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation of the land I'm sitting on at the moment here in Sydney. I want to congratulate Mohammed Semra and April for their awards. Also acknowledge Spicy in Bamana. It's an incredibly horrific story, one of thousands. And I noticed that there is a link about Spicy's story, please. I know we've got 74 or so people on here, so probably 65 or so attendees. Please read up on Spicy and raise your voice, because it's just shocking what's occurred there. 2,737 days, Moz said, and yet he, like so many of them, were prepared despite the fear mongering, despite the mistreatment of guards, despite the systemic pressure not to expose this cruel regime. People like Moz and so many others inside have been incredibly strong to raise their voice. I'm talking, and in particular, sending all my love and support to Ismail and Don Khan and Kasura at the Park Hotel in Melbourne, to Jalal in Baita, to Abbas and Hajar, Magyamas up in Darwin. Of course, we had 3 families there until very recently. 2 are now gone, and just 1 family is remaining with I can't say dwindling hope, because how can one have hope when they not only have been detained, incarcerated against their basic human rights for over 8 years, as you all know. 8 year was the anniversary last Monday or so, or the one before that, 2 weeks ago, roughly, on the 19th of July, 2013 to 2021. What a disgusting period in our history this is. Shameful, something that will never live down, something that has bled into our national psyche, this privatised system of cruelty that's cost us, as Moz said, around or more than 12 billion Australian dollars, $800 million alone this year for just several hundred people offshore. Staggering waste of money, staggering gouging by private companies on the public purse, you and my taxpayer money. For any Australians who may be listening or either live or later, at some point, you have to consider the disgraceful waste of public money at a time when our universities are becoming more expensive. Our public school system is being progressively defunded. The ABC funding is under pressure. Here in Sydney, we pay to drive on roads, and even Medicare is under pressure. And yet these people have the most basic of human rights, that is to flee for safety. And among all of the community of nations around the world, Australia stands as one of the most torturous policies on the planet. It's extraordinary, the place where we've allowed ourselves to get. And we have done that because every Australian, myself included, have a deep responsibility to speak up on all of these social issues. And this goes to the very heart of the essence of who we are as a nation, who we are as people. There's a hunger strike going on right now in Maita. Many of you will know. Please raise your voice for those brave, courageous men who've suffered so much already and are simply saying we will not take anything any longer. And Australia needs to understand our plight. Can you imagine just for a moment having to make the ultimate sacrifice to decide not to give your own body sustenance simply in order to make a protest? These hunger strikes are things that we've historically seen all around the world. And yet here it is right in the heart of Melbourne, right in the heart of one of our most global, international and proud cities. It's extraordinary. All of this for recent years has been going on offshore and therefore to some degree was out of sight, out of mind, and Australians could perhaps clear their conscience by believing that it wasn't here. That's changed now. Now you have hundreds of people who are here. You have tens of thousands on temporary and bridging visas with no certainty for them or their children. And we've somehow managed to get ourselves and our country into a disgusting position when it comes to asylum seekers and refugees. To Moz's point, and just quickly, I know that you're running slightly over time, for everyone, and particularly journalists, media and others, it's so important not to regurgitate propaganda. It does, I see every day, from well-meaning Australians saying to me and regurgitating the propaganda, the language, the insanity and the lies that have been propagated about refugees over at least the last decade. It hurts, it works, and it has to be pushed back against. And of course, we're seeing that now also with COVID and climate action and other areas. Finally, I might just say that we all have a responsibility to raise our voices, yes, but to do so in the most effective way. And that requires unity. Across the refugee sector, there are, I don't know how many organisations there are, frankly. There may be several hundred, but there's certainly 150. And the aggregate of the amount of people who support all of those organisations must be in the several hundred thousands, if not 300,000 to 400,000 Australians. Those 300,000 to 400,000 and those 200 organisations must come together and raise one voice. To the degree that the refugee sector is disunited, to the degree that the refugee sector has more hashtags, has more campaigns, have more diversity or disunity, refugees suffer. That is the reality. There's only one obligation for all of us to get the almost 400 people out to be able to sing on the stage at Town Hall in Sydney, as Moz did several weeks ago, or to indeed take any stage in their life that they would desire. And that is that we must unite in the maximum numbers possible to put maximum leverage on the Australian government and opposition now and heading into the next election. This cannot go on. And we all have a responsibility to acknowledge that for all the well-meaning for all of us, we are playing a part in an awful, tragic play here, and we have to change our roles. We must be effective. And advocacy means being effective. It doesn't mean just raising voices and raising placards. So please, to the refugee sector, there is no alternative. You must unite, you must have one voice, and you must get everyone out. Thank you to Liberty Victoria. Moz, all my love as always, and to everyone who's still locked up, we never give up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. What you said about us needing to unite, I think that they're really powerful words, and I think that it is the refugee and asylum seeker space is one where I think it's very difficult to maintain any hope because of how atrocious the policies are that are in place. But people like you, people like Moz, and people like the ones you've named who are in detention, who've been speaking out, continue to do that work. And it's fundamental and important work. And I encourage everyone to get together and to advocate as one voice in respect of those people in custody. So thank you very much, Craig, and thank you very much, Moz, as well.